Hello everyone, welcome back to This Is Why We Stand. My name is Joe Archino, and I was inspired to make this series to convey the true meaning of the American flag and why that flag should never be disrespected and honored forever. And today we're going to be talking about Hal Moore. And sadly, this past weekend, Lieutenant General Harold Moore passed away. And to me, he is one of the just most brilliant and fearless Americans in our long and rich history. And I think a lot of people, the name is very common to, because a lot of people have seen the movie We Were Soldiers. His story is depicted in there. And then, of course, there's also the book We Were Soldiers Once and Young, where his story is told there. But if I needed one quote to tell you everything about the man that he was, I think it would be this one. He said to his men right before the start of the Vietnam War, when they were going to go into combat, when we go in, and I'll start the quote right here, "When we go into combat, I will be the first man on the ground and the last man out, and I will leave no man behind." Now, those are words of a true leader, and that's exactly what he was. Now, during the first engagement of the Vietnam War between the Americans and the North Vietnamese Army, the Americans were outnumbered nearly 8-1 by the NVA. Now, original reconnaissance kind of led the American forces to believe that the number of enemies in the area was substantially lower, but once they were there, they were outnumbered tremendously. And while the odds did even out a little bit more towards the end of the 3 days, it still was overwhelmingly in the American disadvantage. And I think more than anything, when you look at the conclusion of the battle, I think the words of Joe Galloway are also so telling here. Galloway was a war correspondent during the battle. He wrote the book of We Were Soldiers Once and Young with Moore, and he had a very big hand in the movie as well. And I mean, he more than anyone reveres Hal Moore because, and I'll give you his quote why he does so. He said, "I think every one of us thought we were going to die at that place, except Hal Moore. He was certain we were going to win that fight, and he was right." And I think his words are so telling too, especially when you consider just how so many journalists and people in the media were so opposed to the Vietnam War, and throughout the war really never gave the U.S. military the respect and honor that it deserved because they didn't want to push the war agenda. But Galloway saw it firsthand, and I think it changed his outlook on life for the rest of time, and it certainly gave him a respect of Moore that so many of us are able to hold here. But at the conclusion of the battle, 79 Americans were killed, another 121 were wounded, but I think most importantly, true to his words, Moore was the last man off the battlefield, and none of his men were left behind. And, you know, you could kind of go all into the different complexities of this battle, what worked, what didn't work, why certain things happened. But I think there's a resounding thought of opinion here, and that is that Moore saved his men, saved the day, won the battle through his sheer brilliance as a commander, through his leadership, through his encouragement, through his ability to correctly predict what the enemy was going to do. And I think all of that becomes even more impressive when you think about this was a different enemy than any other one faced by the U.S. military to this point. Fighting the North Vietnamese was so different. This was not a normal enemy that rallied behind a singular nation. You know, this was a very different set of circumstances that the U.S. was operating under, a different terrain they were operating under, with new technology, helicopters, other types of things. So when you kind of take that all into account, and you think this is really the first major battle between an enemy that the U.S. has never faced before, I think all of that makes it even more amazing and adds to the legacy of Hal Moore. But we certainly will never forget what he meant to this country, and I will leave you with that quote once again because I think it says it all about the man that he was. "When we go into combat, I will be the first man on the ground and the last man out, and I will leave no man behind. Hal Moore believed in those words, he lived by those words, and he didn't leave a man behind, and he was the last man off the battlefield. But that is going to do it for this episode of This Is Why We Stand, everyone. Always remember that we honor the legacy of these people by remembering their names and their stories forever, and Hal Moore is just another example of that. I will be back very soon with the next episode, and thank you for listening.